Good day to you. And it's Friday, which means the weekend is here. Are you excited? Just think, after today, we will already be 1/3 of the way through the course. Pretty amazing. And you know, time itself is an amazing thing to think about when we think about a 3-week course, and our course starting exactly at 6 o'clock, at least if I can get my video uploaded by then. We in the Northern Hemisphere, and the further north that we go from the equator, we move our lives according to specific time. And you'll find that the further north you get, the more rigid we are with time, as compared with Mexico. In Mexico, time is elastic. One of the most important words you can learn in Mexico is mañana, means tomorrow, but it doesn't really mean tomorrow. It just means that, you know, when you look at the clock from a Mexican point of view, it goes around and around. So if you miss 3 o'clock today, guess what? It's coming around again. So mañana is fine. If not today, mañana. And if you ask to meet a Mexican at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, sometimes it's not happening until 3 o'clock. I'm sure it's very similar with other Latin cultures. Diego can answer that for himself, Samantha as well, with Latino and Latina backgrounds. But in Mexico, that's a very strong feature, as is much of the rest of Latin America, I assume. You know, one of the main reasons I come to Mexico is really for mental and physical health. And when it comes to physical health, I'd like to take the opportunity to show you some of the food that you can get down here, and then we'll be moving into today's chapter. So here we have a great example of fresh fruit, really fresh fruit. So the orange is scarred on the outside. It hasn't been waxed. It hasn't been picked 3,000 miles away and is sitting on a train and then a truck. This is the real deal. When you open it up, it's full of juice. This one I don't even know. I believe it's a guayaba. We're going to try that for the first time. These are baby mangoes. Fresh tomato. All right, so the point of this is food is extremely fresh in most of Mexico. And when you get it, it doesn't have that packaging that we often have that goes with our food. You know, our apples are waxed in a store, for example. Even their candies. Here's some candies. See those pistachio and guayaba berry treats? They're called little rolls. So that's, I mean, of course they have sugar in them, but they're not pumped up with the kind of sugar that you will find in many American snacks that you go into Wawa to pick up. This one right here is actually a fruit. It's tamarine, and it's a kind of lollipop. And then you have the endless nuts. If you're a nuts fan, we have fresh pecans here. Big bag of fresh pecans. And coconut. Fresh coconut, and cacahuates caramelized. Cacahuates are peanuts. And these ones are caramelized, they're coated in sugar. And then you have regular cacahuates as well. Those are regular peanuts. So I'm showing those things because when you have a diet that is surrounded by that kind of food, as opposed to packaged foods, as opposed to fruits that are coming from all over the world and are not necessarily fresh when they arrive, as opposed to being local, as opposed to food that has a lot of high concentrations of white sugar in it, you don't get as healthy. So that's one of the reasons I come to Mexico. It's one of the reasons many people, including all the Canadians and the other Americans, come to Mexico for. And I think you'll find some similar properties in Brazil as we head now to talk about Brazil. It's another dimension of Latin America, although it's going very, very far south. And what do you know about Brazil before we get to media? I mean, if you're like me, you really know only about Brazil through our own media and maybe some of your own independent investigation. Have you ever heard of the saying, all you need to know about Brazil is the 3 S's? Have you heard that before? Samba, which is a style of music, salsa, which is a style of dance, and soccer. That's what they say you need to know about Brazil. It is the 4th biggest country in the world, and the language that's spoken there is not, as you may think, Spanish. It's Portuguese. It was colonized, I should say, by the Portuguese. What else do you know about Brazil? There are Brazilian restaurants that are heavy on meat, similar to Argentina. You may know about that. You may know about the Brazilian bikini, right? It's an article of clothing that most of the world knows about. For a time it was laughed at because the Brazilian bikini for the male is extremely small. And an American male would have a hard time wearing that kind of bikini at the New Jersey shore without people saying some derogatory things. And a female bikini, same thing. Coming from those beaches in Rio de Janeiro. Brazil also has tremendous natural resources, including a giant rainforest that has been under threat of destruction for many, many years. And it is within that kind of environment that you have the setting for one of the telenovelas that has been the most popular in Brazilian history, which we're going to be talking about in class today. So let's move into Brazil so that we get to know Brazilian entertainment media. This particular chapter is focusing on the telenovela and the techniques that are used to produce telenovelas in Brazil. And so I do advise you today, if you can find a soap opera in your own country to analyze using the chapter concepts, it certainly would make your job a little bit more connected, but you can really use any fictional programming on television, and really any programming is up to you. I'm just kind of giving you a suggestion there. So Brazil is one of the two major players in Latin America when it comes to producing media. We know that Mexico is one. We've already covered that, and now we're finishing up our final country in this side of the world, and Brazil is another big powerhouse. And the authors use the terms to describe the way that the Brazilian telenovela is set up within the media industry. Actually, excuse me, let me backtrack. The authors use the terms dynastic, patriarchal character. Dynastic, patriarchal character to describe Brazilian media. And if you break those words down, dynastic means when you have a dynasty, it means you have a core of family and relatives and friends, and they have the power, and they just pass that power from one generation to the next because of their wealth, their power, and their influence. That's what a dynasty is. Patriarchal speaks to that it has a machismo, male, father, that's what patriarch means, element to the way that media are structured. That didn't really come out clearly in this chapter. I think what the author was trying to indicate there is that most of the decisions are made by men, and most of the plots and telenovelas revolve around men, but I'm not entirely sure about that. The two big players, when we look at big players as far as media that the rest of the world knows about that come out of a country, are TBA and Globo TV, or TV Globo is the parent company. Whereas when we talked about Canada, we talked about the CBC. When we talked about the United States, we didn't talk about anything in particular, but maybe CNN is what most people know around the world. If you know about Brazil through Brazilian media, you know about Brazil probably through Globo TV. Globo TV is a big platform. It's been pumping out telenovelas, or Brazilian soap operas, for years, and they're circulating all over the world. 6 decades they've been putting out very successful productions, telenovela productions. And one of the reasons that these productions, according to our authors, have been, one of the reasons that these telenovelas have been successful is because they use a technique of production called open text, which is very interesting. And it's the idea that the story, the plot for the telenovela is not written until the time at which the characters are presented with the information to help them act out their parts. So the storylines are written last minute, so to speak. And in conjunction with the stories being written last minute, having an open text to them, you also have the incorporation of audience feedback, which was not that well described in the chapter until the very end of the chapter, when they talk about online data that is gathered from people who are viewing television shows, and then that data is incorporated into the writing of the show through the open text process. And that online data comes from Twitter as well. So there's audience participation that's going on with the open text. And the chapter focuses on one particular telenovela, which is very interesting, and I've got a link for it, for a 5-minute trailer that I would like you to take a look at. I'm mentioning it now because I want you to look for some of the things that we're going to be talking about here momentarily when you take a look at that telenovela today. So first of all, the name of this telenovela is Vielo Chico. Vielo Chico, that's the name of the boy. Vielo and Chico is boy. So it's Velo, V-E-L-H-O, Velo Chico. It's the name of a boy, but he's not really a boy. He's a man, presumably a handsome man. And he's the star of this soap opera, which takes place in a major river in Brazil. talked earlier about the Amazon forest, about the natural beauty and resources of Brazil. So this takes place at a river, and you can say that this male actor is one of the protagonists in this storyline. The other protagonist is not a person, it's the river. So the river is portrayed in a way that has mystical properties. It has a life form to it. And in fact, in real life, the river is under threat from pollution and excavation of property and non-committal of government resources to cleaning it up. So the plot is actually mirroring some of what is happening to the river. But it's an interesting idea, is it not, to take an element of nature and to make it a protagonist that has lifelike qualities within this particular form of fiction, the telenovela. So in this production, what happened was, this has happened in 2 incidents that the chapter talks about, is the leading character died. And how did he die? His name is Domingos Montagne. And if I'm interpreting or translating the word Domingos right, that's Sunday, right? So I think his name is actually Sundays Montagne. And he died. How did he die? He died by drowning. Where did he drown? In the very river that the soap opera revolved around. And he drowned on the evening after one of the shoots for the soap opera. And he drowned opposite his co-star. They were both swimming and got pulled under by an undercurrent. And she was able to grab a rock, and he was not, so he perished. So the producers and the writers had to make a decision about what to do, and they decided, innovatively, according to our authors, not to eliminate the character from the show. Instead, what they did was they made a camera become the character. So the other characters who are still on the telenovela, who are acting, they're speaking directly to the camera, and the camera is operating as the eyes and the ears of the perished Domingos. At the same time, what that does is that puts the audience in the position of being Domingos, because you are seeing people speaking to you in a camera. Pretty innovative, right? So imagine what it was like for the actors to have to find out that they've lost one of their co-actors, and now they have to act towards him, but they're acting towards a camera, and they're trying to play it as if they are acting towards a human being. It must have been tremendously difficult. This is part of this open text technique, which existed before the death of the lead character. Brazilian telenovelas were constructed that way beforehand, but this was the ultimate test. And so in this particular telenovela, they decided to keep going. Really amazing. Also, when you consider how telenovelas are produced, I alluded last time when I talked about Mexican telenovelas, I talked about how they finish after 6 months. And then the next one starts up and all the actors move over. And that's very different from American soap operas, where you have the same actors on the same soap operas for years. I've sometimes heard females say, I haven't watched General Hospital for 5 years, but last night I watched an episode and I'm all caught up. And that's because of the themes that cycle, that are predictable through the American soap operas, are not necessarily the case in telenovelas, which finish usually after 6 months. Or 180 to 200 episodes is what the book says for global TV telenovelas. And when you think about what telenovelas address, you can say that what they address are these really broad, abstract, you can call them virtues, but I don't even think that's the right word as well. They're life struggles. So some of the life struggles that are addressed by telenovelas are honor, goodness, love, villainy, life, virtue, and sin. That last one is a big commentary that telenovelas are usually deeply embedded in Catholic countries where sin is a legitimate concept. It's not a legitimate concept for all people, depending on their beliefs, but it's one of the core challenges and struggles that go on in telenovelas. So before I mentioned all that, I was starting to tell you that there's one other innovative technique that the particular telenovela Velo Chico used when the lead character died. And I had to mention this other stuff so that you have an idea of how telenovelas cycle through the system. They will finish on a Friday and the next one begins on Monday. And it's like an assembly line. We talked about how the factory was a metaphor for producing values by mass media. We've talked about that in a couple classes, but here we actually have the telenovela being constructed as an assembly line production. Get it done, get it done. The next one starts on Monday. So this innovative technique, which I'm still delaying telling you about, is at the end of telenovelas, traditionally they have FIN that comes up in big letters at the end, and that means finished. And you know what it's like when you finish the last episode of a Netflix series that you've been binging on. It's like, can't believe it's over. Is that really the last show? Are they going to do another season? I'm going to have to wait. Well, that's what the fin does, finished. It triggers that. So they decided at the end of this soap opera not to put fin. And that left it open-ended and encouraged audience participation. Now, all of this is not simply adapting to real life. Also, what's happening here, according to our authors, is this is a very shrewd commercial strategy. Because what you are in fact doing is you are mirroring life, first of all, which people want to see. But secondly, and most importantly, from a business standpoint, you are capturing your audience. Because if the audience becomes accustomed to participating in the media content as opposed to just taking it in, if the audience is accustomed not only to participating but actually shaping the content, because the comments that you're making are being considered by the writers and the producers, then that audience is going to remain. So it's a very, very sharp commercial strategy that telenovelas have come up with. Now, there was another telenovela, just to show you that this is not a one-time isolated incident, that also mirrors similar properties to a death and to incorporating the death in open text. We have another telenovela starring Daniela Perez in the 1992, I think the year was, 1992, and she passed away. She was assassinated. And the lead suspect was her on-screen character. And so they wrote this into the plot. They wrote this into the plot of the telenovela through the open text. It's just fascinating to me because so much of media production does involve planning. I mean, when Drake drops a CD, for example, I mean, he didn't do it the night before. I mean, he or drops a song, that's usually what happens today. He spent weeks, months, a lot of time in a Minneapolis studio, other places, getting people to sing, play. That's how media production usually develops. It takes weeks, months, sometimes years. Television production takes years. So the telenovela method speaks to an industriousness, I believe, on the part of the writers and the producers to be able to keep up with the pace and remain open to last-minute changes. And so there you have it. That is going to wrap up our class on the Brazilian telenovela and the new aesthetics, as the author calls them, that are being used to produce this fascinating media form. I hope you have a great day and a great weekend.